And welcome to Off the Couch, where psychology meets everyday life. I'm Dr. Greg Cason, psychologist, and I'm here with producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
And I'm here with Jamie on the board. Hi, Jamie.
Hello, hello.
So today we're going to have a special day because I wanted to talk about fear. Halloween's coming, and we've got some real reasons. And we're watching this presidential election, and there seems to be one side of the aisle, if you will. Are there two sides? Well, actually, we hear it from both sides in some ways that we need to be very afraid. So I asked the question, should we be more afraid than we actually are? And in Psychology in the News, I'm going to actually go into the hardcore statistics of fear, which is I'm going to look at murder rates everywhere you think, and it's not what you think. I was actually surprised about several of these places where murder is happening and places where murder is not so bad, believe it or not. But Brian, you witnessed a crime not too long ago, remember?
Yeah.
Tell us again what happened?
This guy that owns his own training gym, he was outside his gym as I was walking my dog, and three guys jumped out of a car and started beating him up and held him at gunpoint, trying to rob his watches that he was wearing a watch and some bracelets, and he had his dog with him too, which was just crazy. I thought they were trying to steal his dog, but it was his jewelry that they were after.
And how far were you from this crime?
Well, it's crazy. I was walking across the street and the car did this illegal U-turn as we were crossing. So I was like, oh, they're freaking stupid. And kept walking and didn't think anything of it. And then I saw the car kind of parked right next to where I was walking on the sidewalk already. And I kept walking. I didn't think anything of it because people stop there all the time. And then I realized something was wrong whenever the pedestrians walking towards me started freaking out, and I started hearing his dog barking hardcore and yelling. And that's when I was like, oh, they were robbing him. And I ran to throw my dog into the lobby where I used to work at and try to run back. But that's when I saw that they were holding him at gunpoint. And it was crazy because it was at 2 p.m., mid daylight, and just on Sunset, so it's a busy street. There was a bus.
Yeah, Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very busy.
There was a bus, a city bus, trying to stop at its bus stop where the car and the getaway car had stopped. So it was everybody was just witnessing this happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they were wearing masks.
Yeah, they were all masked. Wow. Yeah. And we saw on the Citizens app that 30 minutes later, something like that was happening, just south. Down La Cienega pretty much, so they must have gone somewhere else to try to rob somebody else.
Well, you're just giving a perfect segue to today. How about you, Jamie? Have you witnessed any crimes?
I mean, I got catcalled the other day. I don't know if that's really a crime.
That's amazing.
That's kind of the closest thing.
Is that a bad thing or a good thing?
I thought it was more funny because it wasn't scary at all. He was far enough away from me where I was like, oh, that was silly. He called me mon cœur, which is I think my love in French.
My love. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, thanks, I guess.
Yeah, right on. I was once passing a construction site, not an all-female construction site, an all-male construction site, and it was in San Diego, California, and they all started catcalling me.
Wow.
And, maybe I should have been upset. If I were a woman, I probably would be, but I was kind of into it. I thought, right on. I don't know if they're making fun of me or they actually do think it's good, but I was like, okay, I'm going to enjoy this very unusual experience.
It's not. It's weird. For sure.
It does make you feel weird. I witnessed a crime too, of course, that I walked in on a home invasion. I've talked about this before. I walked in when my house was being robbed by two guys, and they had destroyed the house. And walking in, they ran out the back, and we had to deal with it from there. And then I ended up having to testify in their trial, one of their trials. So, it was pretty much a wild thing. Let me ask, so maybe I'll ask you, Brian, are you more afraid living in Los Angeles after experiencing that crime?
No. For a while, I was like a lot more cautious, though, especially when I would walk my dog. I already don't like wearing like jewelry or anything as it is, but like I was just always kind of careful with like wearing a nice watch or anything. Just you never know, you know.
You changed your behavior.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was more aware of like cars passing by because, like I said, the car that was the people that were robbing. Like drove right in front of me, and I was so like whatever about it, didn't think anything. That I'm like, okay, we kind of just gotta watch our surroundings a lot more.
It's pretty wild. I didn't feel more fear after experiencing the home invasion, but I did change my behavior. I started locking more, being more aware of things, people coming in, that type of thing. So I started to be a little more aware of my surroundings, where perhaps I was a little loose in the goose before that happened. But, maybe our experience is not exactly the same. Let's look at what goes on for people in the United States. Are they afraid of crime? I found this Pew Research Group, and Pew Research Group does like large-scale surveys with people, and they found they were looking at crime and what people think about crime in the United States. This is a recent study. A growing share of Americans say reducing crime should be a top priority for the president and Congress. We hear this a lot with the presidential election that's going on right now. Crime, 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 crime. 58% of adults hold this view, in fact, that crime should be a top priority. This is up from 47% in 2021, which is significant because in 2021, crime rates were a little higher, which is interesting, but we perhaps see a lag effect. The challenges in crime reporting. I was talking about this earlier with you guys that, it depends on where you get your crime statistics from. The FBI is actually the official gatherer of nationwide crime statistics, and the FBI only captures reported crimes. So they have this whole mechanism with the entire United States. And some states refuse to report crimes. A couple of the states, I don't know which ones, but most of them do report. So they report the crimes and, the FBI puts it in a big database and they say this is what's going up or down. And you're always looking at these trends. The other one is the Bureau of Justice statistics. And I told you, and when I was in college, when I was in my graduate school, in fact, I used to work doing this, gathering these surveys where I would go and interview criminals and I would go into these crime-infested, places, and I would go to just all kinds of crazy places. I'd interview parolees and all kinds of things, and collect surveys, and we would talk about and we would report and guesstimate unreported crimes. So they weren't necessarily official. In fact, things could be highly subjective, especially when you're interviewing a select group, like people who are already committing crimes. Like when I'm interviewing people in jail and I'm asking them about crime in their neighborhood and what do they perceive, that's sort of a select group they're kind of hanging out with other criminals and things. So it has limitations, but it gives you a window on a world that perhaps you wouldn't have if you were just relying on crime statistics. So really the two things together can give us a picture of what's going on. And what's good about those types of interviews is they help us to see what direction things were moving in. That was always our thing. I worked in epidemiology at the time, which is really how disease moves through the nation. But here, if we were to look at the disease of drug abuse, the disease of crime, we would try to look at how things were moving through the population. And this was at UCLA when I was there. And one thing that was just always interesting is we were always trying to anticipate things that were happening. If I were to go off on a real one, we were funded also for another project by the state of California. This was under Governor Duke Majan. I'm sure neither of you know who that is because that was quite a while ago. And Governor Duke Majan defunded our state funded arm that I was personally working on, and we were looking at, guess what? Methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, we were predicting at that time it was going to make the jump from Hawaii to the mainland. but that the administration, the Duke-Majan administration, actually told us that they did not believe that would happen. It was taking too long because we're making these predictions, but it still hadn't really happened. We hadn't seen evidence that it was starting to pop up here in the United States, in the stateside. And they said, it's taking too long. We're cutting off your funding. I swear to you, it's like the next month it started popping up. We started seeing evidence of it, and everyone knows that methamphetamine is pretty much everywhere now.
Do you think they were trying to cover it up?
That's a good question. Sometimes people do want to hold back things and defund things because they don't want them reported. That's a kind of dark side of research. Like government can say, we don't want to know about X population, so we're going to pull from understanding it. A good thing, like during the last census, they cut a lot of the funds and cut off a lot of the timelines with the census, which is a super important study that measures people throughout the entire United States. One of the most important studies we do. But one thing that happens with the census is they base Congress members on, how many people are there in the district or in the area. So it's really important to get representation, that everybody in the census be counted. But if you're not counting things like the people who live there may not vote, but they do live there, so their needs are represented. They do need them to be represented, so they could be like a green card holder, legal immigrant. They could be an illegal immigrant, or they could be someone who's kind of living off the grid. They still need representation, believe it or not. So they do want to know about that there are people out there and what they're doing, like who is homeless and who's doing these things. So when they cut the funding and they cut the timeline for the census, I was just whacking myself. No, that sounds awful. I was hitting my own head because I could not believe that they would do this, but I understood the political reality that was going on. They didn't want the representation of these harder to define groups, the ones that don't just fill out a form and send it in, the ones that you have to go out and find and talk to. They're the ones that cost money, but their needs are just as important. So it comes down to, so I'll get off my soapbox. It comes down to just public perception versus reality. Americans tend to believe crime is up, believe it or not, even when official statistics say crime is down. So it's like we're getting more and more hyped up. Demographic differences in crime do make a difference. Young people experience more crime and lower income people experience more crime. So they're more likely to be victims of violent crime, which is especially concerning according to the 2022 Bureau of Justice Statistics survey. So why this kind of survey is really important, that you don't have reported crimes. They're going out and saying, you were in a fight, or this thing happened, or you're in this abusive relationship. Oh, he cut you. I mean, you go deep in these surveys, you really kind of try to understand what's going on and try to guesstimate what's going on in these populations. So you are actually looking at those things, so they are of value. Okay. So reporting and solving crimes in 2022, only 41.5% of violent crimes, 40, it's a little specific, but about 40%, and about 30% of property crimes were reported to police. So most people don't report crimes to the police.
It's funny you say that because a few years ago when my car got broken into, I almost didn't report it because I ran out there as soon as I heard the alarm, and they were already gone. And it's like, well, the police can't really do anything. And I thought about it, but I was like, well, maybe in case they are around the neighborhood and it happens to somebody else, I might as well just let them know. But yeah, I thought about not reporting it. I was like, well, they can't do anything now.
Good for you. My car was broken into and I didn't report it.
Oh, wow.
I suppose I should have. I was only like 30 at the time, maybe younger, but probably 25, 24. Now I'm thinking about it. I know exactly what car it is and where it was. It was in Hawaiian Gardens. It's not as nice as it sounds, people.
Okay, but when that happened, did you feel super uneasy for the next few days about it? Because my car window was smashed and everything.
Brian, I was devastated. it was a brand new car that and I was stupid. By the way, if they try to make you drive a car off the lot, you're taking responsibility for it. They told me, I don't have insurance. I need to go and get insurance and I'll come right back. And they go, no, you have to drive it off the lot first. And I was like, well, and I was young, I was dumb. And it was a brand new car and I bought it myself and got the money down. And it was like, Goonie me out of college doing my thing. It was a Honda CRX and like the very cheap, and just I loved it. I love that car. Anyway, I drove it off the lot and I parked it and I went and got insurance, came back and it was broken into.
Wait, while you were getting the insurance?
Yes, while I was getting the insurance. And needless to say, Geico canceled me almost immediately after that. They paid for the claim and they canceled me. So I never reported that crime. I was too devastated, I think. I was just a young kid. So less than half of reported crimes are actually solved. I wonder if it's less here in LA. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little down on LA sometimes, but I do love it. But let's talk about why this even came up. I was starting to think about crime, and it wasn't just what's going on the media. We're constantly hearing about how dangerous things are. And my dad, who watches Fox News constantly, and he sees stories about Los Angeles, and he's like, you need to carry a gun with you at all times. And no, I don't know if what he says that, but I'm sure he thinks it. He thinks I'm crazy for living here. He thinks that people are constantly breaking in stores here and taking goods. And it does happen. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen someone shoplift or anything, but I'm sure it happens right in front of us. I've seen people in trench coats on a 90-degree day. I'm sure they're doing that. I'm just kidding. But people do go in and do these things. So he watches that, and then I was talking to a client who witnessed a crime, and so I was, deal with that. And then she told me she goes on Nextdoor all the time, and she's like, I just look at it all the time, and I'm always paying attention to Nextdoor and this and that. Nextdoor is kind of like the Citizen. The Citizen app is just all crime, I think, where Nextdoor is like,
well, not just crime, just things like if there's a fire or something like that,
yes.
people will report it, you know?
Yes. Yes. And Nextdoor is probably the biggest one. Citizen is very big. There's a bunch of other ones, too, that people go on. I had to take them off my phone because I do not like getting alerts. And it kept telling me when a dog was loose. And I was like, I don't need that alert. So anyway, I took it off. But nonetheless, I looked at a study that just was published by someone from my university, University of Houston. That's where I got my PhD. And this Dr. Fetterman, he published this study in Psychology of Popular Media, and he was looking at the what happens with these neighborhood apps and how they affect our perception of crime. What do you think?
Well, I'm sure if you're like the news, if you're constantly watching crazy stuff, you're going to see crazy stuff all the time and only crazy stuff, So I feel like people that are constantly on it, it's kind of a little dangerous in that sense. They
might feel things are more dangerous. What about you, Jamie? Have you ever gone on one of those?
I haven't personally, but I feel like, I don't know, my mom, she lives back in Connecticut, and like she'll see stuff on the news sometimes, the same thing of like there's so much crime in LA and the stores constantly getting broken into. And even when I first got here, seeing like you go to a CVS and you can't get like most of the things, they like put them in the little clear box.
They're locked, yeah.
Yeah, like little lock boxes, or it's like in the back of Walmart, there's like that, little carousel area. But it's so different. You really don't see it as much, but also the place, like LA is huge. So I feel like, I don't know, I haven't seen anything here personally, but I feel like there's still a lot that happens all the time. I don't know.
Well, there is probably a lot that happens. We are a very, very big city. We're the second largest in the United States, with New York being number one. So, we got a lot going on. So, yeah. But but those plastic things didn't exist here until until the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic, I think, heightened a lot of situations overall in that sense that I feel like things got a little intense.
Do you buy those things? Like, if it's behind plastic, I give up quickly. I'm like razor blades, I'll just let my beard grow. I mean, it's just tough.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's not like that everywhere. It's just certain areas that, like, those specific stores have issues with theft. I feel like that's whenever they have them up.
Well, I live in a really high tourist area, so I live by one of those stores. So these neighborhood apps like Citizen, Nextdoor, Neighbors by Ring, so the Ring camera, that's a big one. I watch those videos online. I actually find them kind of amusing. Neighborhood apps provide real-time updates about community, and they even provide crime statistics. But do they make us feel safer? That's the question. So this guy from University of Houston did 2 studies. He did a total of about 800 students, or people, not just students. And he asked whether participants used neighborhood apps and their judgments about local crime rates. So he was looking at both what's their usage of the app and what's their crime rate where they live. And he also looked at perceived local crime rate, like what they thought was going on. And then he personally looked at individuals' actual statistics of where they lived. So he was comparing their perception to the reality. So he actually found something really interesting. Basically, people who used neighborhood apps like Nextdoor and what Neighbors by Ring perceived higher local crime rates compared to non-users. This didn't surprise me at all. But the bias in perception occurred regardless of the actual crime rate. So there could be pretty much zero crime in a neighborhood, but because something was reported, people start to believe them. Remember, they're eating cats, they're eating dogs. Apparently was a woman who did a post on Facebook, a woman who, I mean, she copped to it, and I give it to her, that she was mad at her neighbor, I guess, and posted this thing. And she said, "I'm sorry I did that. That was wrong." And it was the cat was in my basement the entire time. Did you know that? Did you hear that story?
No, that story didn't surface.
Oh, that didn't?
Not like, I guess, to...
You heard the eating cats, eating dogs.
Well, yeah.
Everyone did.
Everyone did. They even made songs about it and everything.
And they're still saying it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And the woman who made the post about the Haitian neighbor, she apologized, said she found her cat in her basement, locked in there. It had been locked in for the past 2 days. And she apologized and came forward. I handed to her for coming forward. And she's a Trump voter herself, and she felt kind of bad about the whole thing. Nonetheless, it's interesting you guys hadn't heard it, but that was the origin of that. Silly thing. And they're still saying it.
Yeah, because people don't realize the damage that their digital footprint does whenever they put stuff out, just not thinking. And you can't, I mean, like, yeah, she apologized, but like, bro, look what you did now.
Well, I can't believe she posted it on Facebook. I mean, honestly, wouldn't she go to her next door neighbor and say, "Hey, have you seen my cat?"
You would think.
Or whatever.
So. People post some crazy stuff on Facebook.
Yeah, they really do. But neighborhood apps like Citizen, which you'd use, Brian, Nextdoor, can lead to inaccurate perceptions of local crimes. But interestingly enough, this was a Facebook thing, and a whole political party glommed onto it and is saying it to this day. I think in the recent vice presidential debate, he kind of refused to back down from it. To, saying, "Oh, people are telling me it's happening," even though everyone, the mayor, the governor, everyone is saying it isn't happening. The woman who originally posted said it isn't happening. Nonetheless, they're sticking to that story. and it's going to have some really negative reverberations for the people who live in that community. I think that's one of the most problematic. The public should be aware of the biasing effects of neighborhood apps when judging local crimes. So if you're on those apps all day long, like Nextdoor and Neighbors by Ring and Citizen, you're going to feel like there's more crime in your neighborhood. Period. But does this hold for the TV news? You pointed out the TV news. And that's remember the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads? So on TV news, if it's good news, it's going to the back of the pile. Maybe it'll get on, but bottom line, most news is going to be something tragic, terrible, awful. It's a weather event. It's a something. If it's a murder, oh my God, a car chase, number one.
I know. My mom always calls whenever there's like a storm, and she's like, "Oh my God, are you okay? I see that there's waves coming in." I'm like, "It's like at San Diego or like by the beach, And I'm like, "No, Mom, like I'm inland." But just that, it's always like, or an earthquake happens, and she's like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Nothing shook."
Well, this study I looked at, this was from the Journal of Communication in 2003, so it was an older study, but I wanted to look at the effects of TV news. And this was actually really nice because in 2003, social media really hadn't taken hold. So it was still a time of pure innocence when we were all watching television. So the impact of local television news was always a talk. And I remember even when I was at UCLA and I took a class in social psychology and we looked at the impact of TV news on our perceptions of crime. I'm not kidding. This is old. This is like, we've been looking at this for a long time. And we looked on the direct perceptions of crime. And this study really looked at two big theories, mass communication theories, but also we use this in psychology. There's agenda setting theory, which is the ability of media to influence the importance of issues. Can they set the agenda? Can news set the agenda? And then there's cultivation theory. How much do we get invested in, like the long-term effects? Like if we're hearing over and over again, they're eating cats, they're eating dogs, they're eating cats, they're eating dogs, they're eating cats, they're eating, and we start to believe it. And this is what starts to happen when you cultivate. You like hit people over the head. Will you glom onto it and hear it over and over?
But that doesn't happen to everybody, right? Or like, is there a specific type of person that happens to?
It's a great question. I don't know.
Okay. No, I was just curious.
I could guess. I mean, I could guess. People, it's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast today, an illegal podcast, and this one woman, she was a journalist, and she was saying how she was on the news, and she and blah 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 and blah blah blah, and they're reporting on the hurricane. And I was watching a bunch of stuff on the hurricane. I was very interested in Hurricane Helene and the effects and how people are dealing with this. Some really amazing footage out there, by the way, people filming their own experience. But nonetheless, I was watching this reporter, and she was saying there's so much misinformation going on about Hurricane Helene, really dangerous misinformation that's causing people not to get FEMA money, or causing them to get very upset and, like attack each other and do these things, because there are these divisive misinformation things going out, some by politicians who are running for offices like president. They're putting out there, and that she said, it's easy if you can just do an internet search. She goes, but most people don't do that second step. And we did a whole show about this. Remember, checking misinformation. Mm-hmm. Checking misinformation. And, it's a good thing to do.
Like critical thinking.
Engage in some critical thinking. But, when people are in a really dangerous experience like Hurricane Helene, they're not perhaps going to be doing that kind of critical thinking looking. So agenda setting and cultivation. So, how much are you going to... Cultivation is really interesting because the theory is prolonged experience. So again, you're hearing it over and over and over again. It shapes people's views about the world, making them believe that the reality that they're hearing about or, it's going to be is the reality that reflects real life. And so we're seeing a lot of that when people report the same lie over and over and over again. It causes them to believe it. And when it's about crime over and over and over again, it creates something called the mean world syndrome, that we look at the world and we think that it's actually dangerous and frightening, the world we live in. And I think this is really fascinating to me because we also did a previous show about aging. Remember this? Yeah. And that when you start to get, remember I talked about when you get older and more frail, you start to become more afraid. And I experienced this when I had some severe knee problems, and I remember feeling afraid to go on a roller coaster, which I would usually do because I'm weird. And I felt afraid, and I had to go, this is interesting. I said no to the roller coaster that day because I just felt kind of like, oh, my body's not holding together. And that was a very small example, but I got a real touch of that dynamic, which is kind of fun. So, research methods. What they did, something kind of interesting. They wanted to look at the effects of local news, so they did this thing called a random digit dial telephone survey. This is when people all had landlines. I mean, I had a cell phone back then, but I still had a landline in 2003. Still had a landline. And so they just called all these numbers in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, Washington, D.C. is well known to have a higher crime profile. So key measures, they looked at local news exposure, the frequency and the contact of local news, television news consumption. So do you watch it every night? How much? Blah, 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 blah. And direct experience. Do they have personal or close acquaintances? Crime victimization? Because when we experience, when we see it happen like you did, like I guess I had a crime happen to me, but it almost was as if I was watching it because I walked in. It's not like they came up to me, but I did have a house with lots of stolen things. So yeah, you experience crime victimization and the actual neighborhood crime rates. So they're looking at the news exposure and direct experience. Okay. The key findings, there were local TV news has an agenda-setting effect. So what's on the news, we pay attention to. So that's what we're thinking about. We see what they feed us. It influences what residents of Washington, D.C. believe is important. And crime is the case here. It's important. But there's no cultivation effect from watching the news. Because, wow, why? Watching the news does not increase our fear of crime victimization. Why do you think? This is different from an app. This is different from Nextdoor. This is different from Citizen. This is different from seeing it on Facebook. Why is it different? What do you guys think? I have a theory.
Because it's not social media, you think? Or...
Well,
is it,
what does social media give us? Yeah, it's on a phone.
Oh, that satisfaction or what is it? Instant gratification or?
Oh, it does give us instant gratification, and I think it has it's that with social media we feel personally touched. By what's going on. I mean, don't you see people on social media and then you see them in real life and feel like you know them?
Yeah, I guess
and you
that
don't.
Makes sense. Like if you're following certain people and those people that you follow are posting about it or something, and then you're more prone to be like, oh yeah.
And like the crime apps, they're showing you like a corner where, you know that corner. I walk by that corner every day. or, oh, look what happened here or what happened there. Where TV, it's just all over the city and it's happening and you're very passive. Social media, you're more active, you're seeking it out. I mean, sometimes you're kind of passive, let's face it. But I meant you seek it out. So one is news. That's kind of like news finds me type of thing. You feel like if it enters your world, it must be important. Where the news, where you find the news, like look in a newspaper or turn on the news, it's in front of you. It's like you're watching a show.
Like it doesn't really affect you almost.
So people, so they'll pay attention to it, but they won't necessarily think this is the worst thing. They won't think, oh, like we always see car chases here in LA. Of course, we're a big car culture, but I never think, oh, LA is like the car chase capital. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I never think that. But if you're watching the news, I swear every other story was a car chase there for several years. What?
They should report on the traffic.
They do. What do you report on?
That it's happening.
The traffic is actually moving today.
That would be a miracle.
That would be, remember, good stories don't lead. So what are they going to say? So people, though, who are not residents can have a perception, like the agenda setting, there's a real problem out there, like your mom watching the news, or friends when we have an earthquake or we have a fire that's 2 hours away and they're like, was your house burned? Well, it was 2 hours away. But thank you for checking. Even sometimes I've had things that, like my sister, her house was burned down in the Malibu fire, and then she had lived in another house that was smoke damaged. And it was weird to think this event I watched on the news affected someone I really cared about. So, I mean, sometimes it does touch your life, but I remember thinking at the time, whoa, this thing on the news is happening to her. So that was wild.
Yeah. And when the fires do get close to us, then you really know it's real. You'll see us all posting about it, and that's when you know it's happening. Yeah.
This study pointed out that fear of victimization, the fear that you have, that you start to feel victimized, direct experience really makes it worse. So our experience, Brian, it's weird that we didn't feel like we're going to be victimized. But I wonder if that goes to probably neither of us feels very frail or very weak.
Because when I was a kid, I also went home and walked in on our house getting broken into too. So, but like I said, we're both like over 6 feet. So we're not, I feel like if something was to happen, we would have a little bit of a chance, I guess, but...
Yeah, but you don't think about it at the time.
No.
I just was like, ugh.
No. I often feel like, imagine what it would feel like to be a woman and be a lot smaller and like be so much more vulnerable in the world that we live in, and how scary it is that it's like, oh my God, imagine them just even going out, that they have to have some thought of fear in there.
And I think that's a very good point, because you're walking around, let's say you're not as tall as we are, you're not as large, you're not as, you might be not as physically strong, and you also live in a world, I think women live in a world that's more aggressive. Like men, you're like, whatever, but women have to put up with men like catcalling them.
Or being aggressive, or
like being
assaulting
aggressive
them, or like, it's just constant fear that I feel like
they have to keep more on the defensive.
Yeah.
So I think that, a lot of this has to do with different variables that we're not measuring. But the bottom line of this study said that fear of victimization is directly tied to personal experience, that being a victim of a crime or knowing someone who's a victim of crime increases your fears, and that neighborhood crime rates are associated with greater fear of victimization here, higher neighborhood crime rates. So this was in the Washington, D.C. study. So there they did find a neighborhood effect, but that was probably before the citizen apps and all that. So probably if they're higher rates, they knew about the crime that was happening versus reading about it on their phone. But there's no agenda setting effect necessarily with some of these people. Like that was not a huge finding here. So local news does set the agenda for crime, doesn't cultivate fear. You're separated from it. Direct experience with both neighborhood and personal experiences do not set agendas, but they increase fear of victimization. So it's like, I guess I mean, I don't know how to make sense of that, because like you seeing the crime, I guess you don't think that would be cultivating fear if you thought it was going to happen all the time or you were very focused on it. But
I would have known if it was happening all the time too.
You know, if you had PTSD, then you would be experiencing repeated images, and that might be more agenda setting, because then your brain would be going, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention.
Yeah, like if I was the one getting beaten up, I for sure would have been like, well, I don't know if I want to like work here, you know, or have my gym here, you know. Yeah. Or maybe I would just think about, maybe I wouldn't wear all this jewelry, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. No, it just takes a few days to shake it off, I guess.
Yeah.
Since I just saw it, it wasn't directly to me.
No, that poor guy. Anyway, the media plays a distinct role. So media can be social media, can be media on TV, radio, you know, experience. It plays a distinct role in shaping the importance of news. Personal experience that include things like Nextdoor and citizen apps directly impact our emotional responses to fear. So we need to really key in that those are actually going to make us feel worse. And you know what? I'm really not into feeling worse these days. I want to feel better. But fear,
I want to be in peace.
I want to be in peace. But I will tell you, fear is the most powerful emotion, the most powerful and one of the most basic human emotions. So if we can, so fear is what gets us to pay attention, gets us to block out everything else.
Well, that's, I mean, how you say that, the last vice presidential election or debate,
Yes, yeah.
where they kept saying that illegal immigrants were taking up all the houses, and that's why we have a house shortage. And it's like, you're getting people to fear illegal immigrants, but that's not even the case. Like they're not buying houses. They don't have houses to live in.
And if they are buying houses, they're increasing the economy. I mean, that's, if I'd say if they had enough money, which is expensive. I don't care where you buy a house. It costs money. And it's not an easy thing to do. And if people, that's a different type of immigrant than what they are afraid of. They're afraid of what? The people that are coming across the border and whatnot. Not someone who came from, like, you know, they went to Oxford and then they moved to the United States to become a stock trader or whatever.
Yeah, but it's so easy for like somebody that's living paycheck by paycheck that could be homeless at any moment, and them have this line fed to them that they're like, oh, it's them. And they're going to make sure that I can keep a roof over my head. So that fear that they instill into them, like you said, blocks everything out and makes them just focus on that.
I could spend all day talking about just that. Yes. That's actually a great point. So are there people who don't experience fear, who don't get scared, do you think?
I'd be scared of that person who doesn't get scared, you know?
Well, there's actually a thing called mind blindness, or aphantasia. Aphantasia is actually a thing that we know about. I mean, this is kind of interesting. It's the inability to visually imagine things. So you cannot put a picture in your head. You guys know when you read a book or you hear a scary story, you can kind of imagine it.
Yeah.
People with aphantasia can't do it. It's kind of a drag.
Oh.
They're just all words.
That sounds scary.
That's what I'm like, that's scary. Like, what does your brain do when it reads?
Well, they measured their galvanic skin response, and they found that they just don't have a fear reaction when they're given a story to, like, imagine. Like, even if it's scary. So it just suggests that there is a critical role that imagining actually plays. And that's why things like PTSD do take hold. They're much stronger. We've got these mental images attacking us. But what's also interesting, they did another experiment with people both having aphantasia and people who are just, you know, normies, like I guess us. We can imagine things. And they found that they reacted the same when they're shown a picture or when they're shown a scary movie. So
they have that emotion.
They have the emotion. They just can't imagine it. Isn't that interesting?
Is it the same? Oh, I mean, I don't know if you would know, but would it be the same if they were like trying to imagine something beautiful that they just couldn't, or like something romantic.
I imagine
or
that would
love.
be the case too. That study covered fear, but I imagine yes, they probably couldn't imagine a flower or something and go, God, can't you think of a waterfall and go, oh my God, yeah, waterfall. Oh, how nice and wonderful.
I would want to know what their brain health wise and how they function with that situation.
It's kind of interesting. It's just one of those neurological differences. We all have them. I mean, they're just all kinds of things. So we think of imagery as an emotional thought amplifier. So it's good that we have this, but people with aphantasia, they're harder to scare because they can't imagine things. So at Halloween, don't tell them a scary story. Just jump out from behind a door.
With a chainsaw.
Yeah, there you go. So let's go to the psychology in the news. Biden administration said crime rate was at a 50-year low, and that was and I found this article that was just published this month that kind of looked at how true is that, because I'd seen that statistic and it's very interesting. And it all comes down to what we were talking about to begin with, the FBI versus the Bureau of Justice Statistics survey, because the Biden administration, they claimed that violent crime was at a 50-year low, but they based it on the FBI statistics. So it's based on actual reported crime. So crime that's reported, it's much lower than it used to be. We're 50-year low. That's pretty damn good. Violent crimes include murder, manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. That is a nasty ass list. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it's at a low.
According to FBI, violent crime in 2023 to 2024 was at or near a 50-year low. And the conclusion is based on reported crime statistics. I'm repeating myself, but Trump, who is the running for president right now, I guess everyone knows that, he made a contradictory claim. He said the opposite. He said we're at an all-time high with crime. And he's constantly saying it's rising, but when they drill down, they found that he bases his stuff on the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And remember I said about that those are estimates based on interviews and based on guesstimates. So it depends. It's just really a very soft science that you're trying to look at the direction of things and you're trying to predict. And it's a very handy thing, but you can never say that's the crime rate.
Yeah.
That would be a lie.
Well, I think their party kind of relies on their own common sense and not like professionals and actual science.
Oh my God, I'm loving our show because we talked about common sense almost first, remember?
Yeah.
And what did we discover about common sense?
It's not so common.
It's not common. What people think is common sense is actually not common. And in fact, people like all three of us can have a different idea about what common sense is.
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
On the same thing, yeah.
Unless we read Thomas Paine. Oh, you guys, that's a book. Anyway, here. To Thomas Paine, one of the founding fathers. Okay, so analysis is called common sense. Anyway, that's a really bad callback there. So the analysis of data, most 2023 data, which was released after Trump's claims, show that the rate of violent crime did not rise in 2023, but stayed the same. But I wanted to look at actual murder rates. So just to kind of look at this, because I thought this was kind of fun, the national homicide rate, and I had to go back because I was looking at this statistical site. So I'm sorry I'm going back to 2022 here, folks. So we're going back a couple of years, which makes a big difference because in the pandemic, we saw a height. We saw crime get at its highest in 2020 during what was a real bad year for crime.
Well, that's what happens whenever like people get cut off from like all their needs.
They get all criminal.
Well, I feel like people start losing it. I mean, people lose their jobs or losing their homes or not having food to feed, so I feel like people just, it's bound to happen.
It wasn't the highest ever, but it had climbed. It climbed during the previous 5 years, and it climbed up to that level. And then after it broke, once when the fever broke and things started to come down again.
I'm sure a lot of things, right, were crazy during that time,
Yeah. So I wanted to look at the states with the highest murder rates, the top 5 states with murder rates in 2022. And Jamie, you can put up that cool graph with the murder rates. Yes, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, New Mexico, and Missouri. They have the highest homicide rates. What is your reaction? Let's get Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, New Mexico, Missouri.
Well, I would have thought it would have been just different.
New York and California.
Yeah, like bigger, more
Higher population.
Yeah, major city where it's like major cities are. That I figured like,
well, these are rates.
Crime.
These are rates. So they're per capita, which means it's per like 1,000 people. Well, here it's per 100,000 people. So they have 21 murders in Mississippi per 100,000 people. Louisiana is about 20 people per 100,000. Alabama is about 15 people per 100,000. New Mexico, 14 and a half, and then Missouri's about 13 people per 100,000, and that's like per 100,000. So I mean, it sounds low, but that's quite going from like 21 down to 13. That's a big spread. But let's look at those states, those lower states, because I was really stunned by this. Because when you really looked at the bigger, can we look at the graph that has all the states on it? When you look at that, you see Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. I'm going to look for California there. Where is California? It's way down there. Where do you see it? Oh, it's about 2/3 of the way down. Excellent. There's California. And what's the other one? We also see New York. Way down there.
Oh, yeah.
We see much lower per capita rates. And I remember I used to live in Manhattan in New York City, and I remember talking to a cop, and I was like, oh, it must be very dangerous here. He's like, no, not really. He goes, I would feel scared to be out in Los Angeles, because I told him I was from LA, and I'm like, oh, really? Oh. But I think those are just perceptions.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because New York's a very compact town. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. Things happen all around you. I remember I lived in an apartment building. This was probably 30 years ago, and America's Most Wanted came and took one of the people away in the apartment.
Oh my God.
Film crew coming in. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
It was kind of like the whole apartment building was a buzz. It was one of these old West Hollywood buildings that were like built around a pool and like a square.
Oh, so everybody saw.
Everyone saw.
Oh, wow.
Like film crew coming in. We're like, what's going on?
You're like, is that Johnny Nextdoor having a party?
Taking him out in the handcuffs.
Dang.
Yeah. I don't remember what he did.
Must have been bad.
It must have been bad. So the largest changes in homicide rates were Mississippi. It went up 103%. New Mexico, 120%. Louisiana, 64%. Alabama, 71%. Missouri, 75%. Why do we think these? I think myself, it's interesting. These are heavy gun culture places. New Mexico, I don't know, but...
Wait, what was Texas? Was Texas
Texas
a big
is
one,
down there a bit. Texas is not as bad as we might think.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that big list. Texas is, where is Texas? Oh, it's, it's about midway. It's right.
Yeah.
It's about midway. Not too bad.
I would have expected more from there.
Texas probably gets the benefit of being so geographically, like, Texas has a lot of people, but they're really
large.
spread out.
It is large, yeah.
It is a big... I don't think people realize how big it is.
It takes so long to drive across it.
You can start one day, like in El Paso, which is on one end, and it will be 24 hours, is it, to get to the other side? I don't know.
So something crazy like that.
It's like a day. It's pretty amazing. So the lowest 5 states are... here we are. New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Utah, Massachusetts, Maine. These are kind of the very sweet little places. You're from Connecticut, aren't you, Jamie? Where's Connecticut?
Right here, we actually minus
Negative.
2.3%.
right.
Not to
That means it's gone
but-
down a little bit.
Yeah.
It's gone down a little bit. Good for you. And you're right next to New Jersey. People think of New Jersey as high crime, which it's just like kind of, no, it's a pretty safe place to live. So New York, California, New Jersey, Texas
Even Texas.
not as bad as you might think. I think it's kind of fun to know.
Surprising.
The highest murder rate cities are Orleans Parish, Louisiana, St. Louis, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which kind of saddened me. I actually really like that town. Shelby County, Tennessee, Jefferson County, Alabama, Jackson County, Missouri, and the District of Columbia, D.C. Good old D.C. But, things have gone up, they've come down. But the conclusion, basically, is homicide rates in the United States remain, they were pretty much what they were before. I mean, they're coming back down. They're not getting higher in most places. But in certain states, they're climbing very, very high. Mississippi had the highest homicide rate in 2022. New Hampshire, the lowest. Many states have significant increases in homicide rates over the past decade. So what's the conclusion for this show? What do you think?
Well, now I'm wondering how much part do states themselves take into causing people to snap and go around killing each other.
Well, I mean, there are gun laws. There are certain cultural issues. There are certain infrastructure issues, I think. When I was looking at North Carolina and I was looking at Hurricane Helene, and I was really noting the infrastructure, how different it is than, say, we have it. We have a lot of advantages here in California that you don't think about. You just don't think about. How are things in Connecticut?
In terms of
Like infrastructure and the roads and
on the higher end,
Higher
a lot
end.
of there are some, a lot of the suburbs are not super wealthy, but then you drive, not too far and it's, a lot of very nice houses and wealthy people.
very wealthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
you got your higher share there.
Yeah.
But I think, it's very interesting, and I think sometimes we get spoiled by that. But I think we're seeing these movements that happened. And I think you see it's the political climate, it's the social climate, it's the guns, it's whatever's going to cause the biggest crime. And then you see, do people maybe focus on these certain like neighborhood app, citizen app? Are they focusing, are they getting cultivated? Are they being told the same thing over and over and they start to believe lies and they start to believe the world is more aggressive than it is, more unsafe than it is? Certainly, there are just certain questions we want to ask. So my conclusion here is to get off the neighborhood apps, get off them. I don't care if you want to find out about every loose cat in the neighborhood. It's just they're not doing you any good. Pay attention to the actual statistics and realize what your per capita is, because you live in a city like the three of us are doing right now, that it's actually, you're going to see a lot of people and there's going to be a lot of stuff going on, but most people are doing just fine. And get out and enjoy your life. That is the bottom line. So that wraps up the show for today. Reminder to like, subscribe, give us 5 stars. Links to the YouTube page. Links are on the YouTube page. Go to youtube.com/Dr. Greg. Also, if you have any questions or topics, hit us up. Socials at Ask Dr. Greg, or hit Brian up on his. And this is Dr. Greg, Brian, and Jamie bidding you farewell. Be present, be flexible, and be kind.